Hi, I'm Mark Jardine, Managing Editor of sailworld.com and yachtsandyachting.com, and today I'm here with Alistair Hackett, the MD at Ocean Safety, and Dee Caffari, MBE, who is a sailor of much renown around the world many times, and we're here to talk about some of the safety features on yachts and really just clear some of the misconceptions and also the understanding of what to do in an emergency. Now, first of all, Alistair, when you're on board a yacht, there are various world sailing categories as to what you require in the way of safety equipment. Could you explain what those categories are?
So the categories vary from depending on what type of sailing you're going to be doing. So it all depends on how far away from a safe haven you're going to be. So at the very top end, you've got Category 0, which is greater than 150 miles from a safe haven, and then it works all the way down through to coastal racing. And obviously, the amount of kit that you've got to carry varies depending on how you're going to be using the boat. I think that World Sailing, the Royal Ocean Racing Club, put a lot of time and effort into developing the categories, developing the equipment required for each category, and developing the way in which it needs to be used on board, and also developing the concept of the checklists, both for Rorke races, as Dee's going to be doing, and putting basically people in a position whereby they can be confident that they've got the right equipment for the right event that they're taking part in.
And with the World Sailing categories, there are additional requirements that the Royal Ocean Racing Club, the Rorke Racing, has. And what additional things are needed there?
Well, it varies again. So the basically Rorke have gone through the World Sailing categories and the equipment required for those, and looked at specific things that relate to their events. And there's areas where we felt it needed to be enhanced, and there's areas where we never want to step backwards, so we never take things out of a list. But there are areas that govern all sorts of things, and it's a wide variety. So bilge pumping is one. That's a classic one that's been lots of discussion about in the last couple of years. Rorke stipulated that they wanted to increase the volume of bilge pump capacity on board vessels, and it's caused a lot of discussion at special regs, shall we say, because the volume of water that was being asked to be moved was very big. So a lot of these things that get added, and there aren't that many, there are just a few, but a lot of things that do get added tend to come from requests from competitors over previous years. They then need to be analysed. We also need to look, unfortunately, at what it's going to cost, because the last thing that we want to do is introduce excessive cost. And actually what we're trying to do is get people out on the water to enjoy the sport that we all sort of partake in, and to put us in a position whereby we're providing equipment that's going to provide the safest platform, but without it costing any massive additional cost. So it does vary. They are all stipulated in the rules, and wherever possible we try very hard not to have them, but there are certain areas that we believe that there are Rorke stipulations within the RORC regulations that need to be added.
And Dee, when you are doing your offshore racing, there are different categories of race that you're doing. You're involved in both Cat 1 racing and Cat 3 racing. How does this change when you are going between the two different types of racing, and what different safety equipment do you have to carry?
Well, there's different levels. Some of it stays the same throughout, and that's the basic gear that you're going to carry all the time. But it can be confusing. So actually what they've done is produce really good checklists that highlight the differences so that you can remind yourself which bits you've got to add for various races. And there's some things that are like high-end items, like a satellite phone for communications for a Cat 1 race. Well, that could be something that you could just rent or hire for that race alone. So that's how it's a really good way of managing the costs involved in something like this. But it is worth going through the checklist every race just to make sure you haven't missed anything off. And I would suggest that you just don't remove too much. Some of the basic stuff you want to be sailing with all the time. And I think managing what the race ahead is and changing the safety equipment just reminds you at the risk involved and what you're trying to prevent happening, because the further you go, the higher the collateral, let's say.
It's all very well having your safety equipment on board and effectively just filling in those checklists that you talked about, Dee, but the awareness of how to use it and what it does is absolutely vital. Otherwise, it's just equipment on board. Alistair, how have things changed in recent years to make safety equipment easier to use and understand?
So I think safety equipment's changed in the last 10 years dramatically. Everything from sort of life raft design, life raft regulation, man overboard equipment, life jacket design and regulation, etc. You know, if you just said to me 10 or 15 years ago that people would be manufacturing life jackets that you didn't mind walking down Cowes High Street wearing, I wouldn't have believed you, but they are now. And I think industry has reached a stage where the design and the regulation by which we have to design product has reached a really good plateau. The regulation and standards are really high. And so it's imperative now that the equipment is of a good standard. It is really, really important that we don't end up in a situation whereby competitors in events are taking a checklist and just going, just have to tick the boxes, happy days, I've passed the inspection, everything's great, because that's only a tiny part of the story. And it then leads on to, where am I going to put it on board? How am I going to use it? What are the implications of me using it? You know, if an AIS unit in a life jacket goes off, what are the implications for the person in the water? But also, what are the implications for the people on board? And you end up in a scenario whereby the purchase and the specification of the equipment is a small part. Then you are then in a position whereby, as a supplier and a manufacturer, we're saying to an owner or a user of the equipment, it's over to you now. You have to go and understand how all this works. And this is where sea survival courses, sea survival training, sea survival understanding really comes to the fore. And Dee, you've done plenty of sea survival courses, and you know, it's just a question of trying to get as much learning as possible into the whole pot. And remember also that every boat is different, every crew is different. You're going to have different strengths in the crew. You're going to have stuff stowed in different places on board. So it is really, really important that the purchase of the equipment is just the initial small part.
And Dee, you have sailed in some of the most inaccessible places on the planet, and often alone. So your awareness of safety at sea is going to be greater than most, but you must be wanting to reinforce to other competitors just how important it is. And how much thought do you put into what the safety equipment is and how you stow it?
I think it's so important, and as you say, experience, you learn from seeing things and doing things and making mistakes. But we do a sea survival course that gives us experience and hands-on with the equipment, but it's every 5 years. So I think it's really important that every boat you go on, every crew makeup you go on, you re-familiarise yourself with the equipment and make sure the people around you know how it works as well, because it's no good just that one person knowing, because they're the one that, if they go in the water, the rest of the boat's lost without them. So you need to think about where you're positioning stuff and how it works. And even if there's a crew or you're double-handed or you're solo, the thought process is different. So for example, I'm double-handed this season. If one of us goes in the water, the other person needs to have the right things accessible from the helm so that they can initiate the rescue plan as is discussed and practiced. You know, that's the other thing, going out and practicing each season so that everybody knows the routine on board, especially when you're on new crews and every boat's slightly different. There isn't a right way and a wrong way of doing stuff. You have to find out what works for you as a team and you as a boat as well. So I think it's just really important that the reminder and the practice and just that familiarization is kept up.
And this is something that's difficult to reinforce to crews, because often they'll just be thinking about the performance and, oh, is that genoa exactly right? Have I got the shroud settings correct? And the safety equipment really needs to be their number one priority. And it's an evolving program. As when you go out and practice, you might find actually it doesn't work there. It would be much better there, Alistair.
Yeah, it's a really important thing. If you talk to a lot of people who do the events and you sort of say, where does safety sit on the priority list? They'll all say it's right at the top of the list because it needs to be. But then in reality, when it comes to practicing to make the boat go quickly versus practicing to do something to do with safety, in the majority of cases, it's going to be practicing to make the boat go quickly, which is going to end up being at the top of the pile. And I can understand why, but in some respects, it's more important that you become very proficient in the things that you're probably not going to have to do than becoming incredibly proficient in the things that you're going to be doing all the time. We're sitting on a brand new boat, which is Dee's obviously going through lots of training and tweaking and playing, understanding and taking how you're going to practice and play with your safety equipment needs to become just a second nature as to how they learn how to use the water ballast down below. It's very difficult to keep crews enthused in something that they think at the back of their mind. Everybody's always going to think, well, it's not going to be me, but it might just be. And that's why it's so important that you take on board the equipment, you take on board the training. And having done all of that, you then sit down and say, well, how does that affect me as a crew member, or on this boat or that boat? Because it will be different. Absolutely critical.
And Dee, it's quite obvious just looking around the boat that you've put a lot of thought into this, and the quick release shackles and just the ways that things are going to get deployed. Do you think that comes from your own experience and just wanting to make sure that safety is number one?
I think so. I mean, I have been that person overboard in a race, and when you have the experience firsthand, you are a little bit more sensitive to it. But also, I think when you're double-handed, the pressure of having each other's backs and looking after each other is really important. When there's a crew, it's a little bit more relaxed because there's a lot of people around involved. So people are a bit more confident. And as Alistair said, nobody ever thinks it's going to be them. But I think, the safety equipment remains the same for a 30-foot double-handed boat as it is for a 60-foot fully crewed boat of 15 people. So positioning of the equipment in the right place and what's relevant to what you will use is really important. And as I said, every boat's going to have a slightly different routine.
So Dee, let's look at some specific safety items here. First of all, your EPIRB.
Yeah, so I picked up an EPIRB. It lives in my grab bag. Originally, I got a float-free system, which comes in a housing, really nice, but with the layout of this boat, it was not practical for the boat. So I've swapped it to this version, nice and compact in the grab bag. Don't leave the boat without it.
And then when you're on board the boat, you're if you need to attract attention, flares.
Yeah, now the rules have changed for the flares this year. We're carrying a lot less flares. So I'd not got one of the big yellow poly bottles that everyone recognises, because we only now carry 2 orange smoke and 4 red handheld flares. But also in my bag is my heavy duty glove, so that if I am operating them, I'm not going to come to an accident. We also in the grab bag have 3 more flares as well. So that's our flare allowance, and they're all pretty much ready to go.
And on board in heavy weather, you have got your life jacket with your 3-point safety line.
Yeah, the safety lines, people are often used to just from the life jacket to the boat just with 1 clip. But there's a proportion of the crew that normally need to have 3 clips, and this has changed. And when you're double-handed, we've both got it. So we've got harness lines with 3 clips, 1 to you, 1 short length and 1 long length, so that you can always be connected. You never have to disconnect from the boat, but also you're not going to be on too long a tether that you're going to risk going over the side.
And inside your life jacket, it has the MOB inside.
Yes, now I've chosen to put that on my life jacket so it automatically goes off when my life jacket inflates, and that will send a signal to a DSC that there's a man overboard, and hopefully be a nice position indicator for somebody to come back and pick me up.
It's very interesting seeing here that you've looked at different types of things and how they're going to activate, and choosing again for your own circumstances, and really shows how the familiarity with the equipment will show how different things need to be used in different situations.
Yeah, I think it's really important to understand how they operate so that you can choose how you want it to be for you. Some people will choose to have an MOB one in a pocket and not have it set on their life jacket, and it just depends if you're going to be wearing your life jacket. For me, it just empties my pockets, but it's all personal preference, and it's all about understanding how the equipment works and making it best for you and the team and the boat.
Alistair, when you're on the boat and the misconceptions we talked about, your 3-point tether, you've seen people not understanding as to which point attaches to you and which point attaches to the boat. Could you explain it once and for all, how it actually works?
Absolutely. At Rourke Special Regs 2 years ago, there was a lot of discussion about 3-hook tether lines. And as a manufacturer of them, I was absolutely amazed at the number of people that we spoke to that believed that the one of the two end hooks was the hook that attached to you. It's not, it's actually the middle hook. So as Dee was saying, you've always got the ability to be attached to the boat, but having the middle hook on you allows you to utilise both the thick short tether and the elasticated one. Now, not every manufacturer is the same. Some do or don't have the elasticated bit, but again, it was a misconception of the fact that, well, yeah, I just clip on with the end line and away I go, and I've got a choice of two other hooks. In reality, if you do that, you actually have the ability to create a 3 metre long tether line, which is too long. You can actually be washed a long way over 3 metres. So the idea and understanding there is, again, just needs to be constantly reinforced by industry, constantly reinforced by professional skippers, and the knowledge just has to be increased softly, slowly over a period of time. Very important piece of kit. It will help you. It will mean that you stay on board the boat, and the question of being sort of just 2 metres away as it goes to sort of three metres, a metre's a long way when you're falling overboard. So lots of thought needed.
Dee, let's move on to your communication equipment on board, and this is a combination of handheld and fixed devices. What do you have fixed on the boat, first of all?
So fixed at the nav station is a VHF unit with the hard wired up to the aerial at the top of the mast. That's actually an aerial that splits with my AIS, so I'm getting AIS data from that aerial as well, and it needs to be DSC ability. So that's the fixed unit at the chart table. We also carry a handheld unit that's waterproof, again DSC enabled, that we have on deck for the start so that we don't miss any communications if we're on deck. Once we pass the start, then that lives in the grab bag. So worst case scenario, it comes with us when we go. It's got spare batteries, it's got charging ability as well, and we make sure that it's fully charged before we set off all the time. And then also we have to carry a spare emergency VHF antenna. I mean, I've just said my aerial's at the top of the mast. If I'm dismasted for any reason, that's my aerial gone. So having the ability to still communicate with an aerial makes a massive difference.
Alistair, when you're out in a Cat 1 race, you need to carry a sat phone. What is the importance of that?
The real significance of the sat phone is it's one of the very, very few pieces of equipment that you can actually communicate with anybody from anywhere at any time. And if you look at VHF, it's quite range restricted. Very, very few boats carry HF radio now. Yes, lots of us rely on our mobile phones, but range is obviously important in those, and you're very restricted. So a sat phone can sort of solve loads of problems for you. Yes, it can help you communicate with emergency services if you're really in trouble. It can also help you to ring home to tell people that you're okay. And from a psychological point of view, that's really important, because if you end up in a situation where you have had to get in a life raft or you are in a position of potential danger, to be able to talk to people shoreside so that they know where you are, they know what your problem is, psychologically is really, really important. And the psychology of safety is critical to how people react in certain circumstances. So really important, sat phone.
And this is something where you can actually have a one-to-one call rather than being on an open channel where you've got multiple people maybe talking at the same time.
Absolutely, it's just like using a mobile phone. And the networks exist now that allow you to be able to speak to anybody from anywhere in the world, irrespective of what latitude you're at. And I think it's a piece of equipment it's expensive, but it's underestimated nowadays, and it's great that certain rules and regulations now are calling for them to be actually held and carried on board.
And Dee, going back to VHF, during racing you have to have a listening watch going on channel 16, as well as pre-start listening to the race committee. And what is your routine for that?
So we have it on the race channel for the pre-start procedure until we've got line clear, and then actually as soon as we're settled, we're on 16 then on a listening watch. And the other good news about being on 16 is there's regular weather updates, so you can actually get the weather for the corresponding area from the local coast guards as well. So it's there because the closest point of rescue quite often is your fellow competitor. So that's why we have the listening watch. That's why we know that we've got support out there, because if we are in trouble, the closest boat to us is quite important, or could be quite important.
Yeah,
having someone close at hand in an emergency is probably the most important thing, and then them being able to communicate with them in a hurry.
Yeah, and equally in reverse, you might be the closest boat that could give assistance. So your listening watch is enabling you to pay it back. So if you're hearing communication where somebody's in distress, you could be the closest vessel that needs to go and be tasked with a response.
Moving towards the stern of the boat, we've got your man overboard equipment. And first of all, I can see the sling over there. Alistair.
So in a man overboard situation, one of the most important things is to actually physically make contact with the person in the water, and quite often getting the boat right alongside somebody is quite difficult. So the rescue sling is designed to be trailed behind the boat. It's got a foam sling on the end so it all floats, and then you circle round the casualty, and in doing that they come into contact with either hopefully the rope that's attaching the sling to the boat, and they work their way back to the sling, and at that stage you are actually in physical contact with the casualty. So again, from a psychology point of view, for the person in the water, it's great because they're with the boat. So a great piece of kit, can be used especially short-handed because you just have to chuck it overboard, and then you can concentrate on driving the boat, and then you actually get in contact with the casualty in the water.
And Dee, you have placed this as really your first port of call at the stern. How have you used this in practice?
So I've positioned it exactly there because we found, especially double-handed, you're driving if the other person's gone in the water, so you want everything accessible. And we've just found, just by lifting the flap up and chucking it out the back, still in control of the boat, it was really relaxing to just then turn circles knowing, one, that they're reassured that you know they're going to be rescued, but that you're going to make contact with them, and it takes the stress off you massively then.
The next thing we'll move on to is the throw line, and again, very easy access position. Now, Alistair, how would this be used?
So the two are quite similar in some respects, but that is designed literally as a throwing line, and the clue is in the name. Instead of having a coil of rope that you might throw to a casualty, it's all in a package. The idea is that the person on board just holds the end and throws the whole package in towards the casualty. It's weighted such that you can actually throw it quite a long way, and again it puts you in that position where you get contact with your casualty in the water. Different lengths of line, you can have it with 20 metres or 36 metres, Rorca requiring a 36 metre length of line. It's quite a long way, 36 metres, but it's all a question of making sure you establish that contact with the person in the water.
And Dee, I notice where you've put this, you've actually got a bit of clear line between the ropes. Is this so in practice you've actually been able to throw it like a projectile towards the person in the water?
Yeah, what you need is a bit of a room to swing. And, you know, if I'm operating this and my co-skipper's in the water, the boat's on autopilot, just keeping it under control, and I'm concentrating on actually trying to throw it right next to where that person is, just for their reassurance. It's really important that we often lash all these things on thinking that we don't want to lose them overboard, but we need to still make them accessible. So mine's just got some bungee round, so it's held securely, but it's really easy to pull out. And as I say, give myself some room to swing and deploy the line.
It's very noticeable the different methods that you've used for the lashings on things, some where you've used, say, a snap shackle and some where you've used the bungee. And the different methods of deployment really show how on different boats and different pieces of equipment you need a different way of deploying them. Next, let's move on to the horseshoe, and also you've got the John Boy, Dan Boy here. How are those used?
So the rules obviously stipulate that for Cat 1 you've got to carry two. And the rules stipulate that one of them can be inflatable, which obviously you've got with the John Boy, Dan Boy horseshoe. Again, it's a point of flotation for the person in the water. They're not the easiest thing to throw. So again, practice is important, has a drogue attached to it. And again, you're giving that person in the water something to aim for, something to focus on. Difference between the two, of course, is that that's essentially a foam horseshoe, comes with a light, etc. The John Boy, Dan Boy horseshoe is a combination of another horseshoe, which will have the same amount of buoyancy as somebody's life jacket. And that one obviously has an inflatable Dan Boy attached to it as well. So you've got that added sort of point of contact that the person on board the boat has got something bigger and easier to see to aim for.
And this looks like something you'd deploy when they are closer by but need something visible to catch onto. And here you've used bungee and any other lashings for this, Dee?
So the drogue cover is secured so that the drogue will be deployed from it, and also the light fitting is secured and the light will be deployed from it. There's also a whistle on there, so it's almost like a means of leaving a litter trail for you to reassure the person you've seen them, but also to follow back if you're trying to find them. But yes, it's that security. The inflatable one is really compact and it's really nice. But the reason we all carry a foam one as well is that reassurance that it will float no matter what. We're not risking a malfunction or risking something not working. We know that can go in the water and that will float.
And then finally, underneath there, you have got your life raft. And this is really the things, when things have really gone wrong, you need your life raft in the position that can be quickly and easily deployed. And I noticed this really is in the most accessible position.
Yeah, I mean, they're quite heavy life rafts by their very nature, so it's important that you actually consider where you're going to put it. Bear in mind that if you really do need it, it's probably going to be rough. You might be you're obviously having a bad day if you're going to need to use it. So the quicker you can get it overboard, the better. Key thing, of course, make sure the painter line is attached to the boat. Make sure it's tied on. Make sure you understand that the painter line is 10 meters long. So there's quite a lot of rope to pull out of the life raft before anything will happen. But 4-person life raft for 2 people on board, absolutely fine. 4-person is the smallest life raft within the regulation that you're allowed to carry. So yeah, it's obviously in this position, going to slide straight over the transom.
And Dee, here you see this is for a 2-person boat, but when you're sailing double-handed, but a 4-person life raft, and it's already quite heavy. When you're going onto fully crewed boats and you've got quite big life rafts, if they're stowed downstairs, that's no use whatsoever, is it?
No, it's going to utilise too many crew to go and get it, and then it's just so bulky it's difficult to carry. The weight is one thing, but it's the shape that makes it difficult to negotiate the bulkheads and the hatches. And one of the tests we have when we're single-handed is anything stored below, can we get it up on deck and deployed within 20 seconds? So, it is a real test, and there is a choice between a valise or a canister, and you just need to get the advice from the experts. But where you store it and how you're going to go about deploying it is really important things to consider, because it's really easy to put it in a lazarette thinking, it's nicely tucked away, the weight's in the right place, but then before you know it, it's covered in loads of other stuff, and actually you can't then get it out in a hurry when you need it, and everyone's a little bit panicked.
And Alistair brought up that so important point of, first of all, making sure it is attached, the painter is attached, and that it's going to go out 10 metres, and getting used to that in practice must just make, when you have an emergency, just knowing that is going to happen, how it's going to happen, must be so important.
Definitely, but that's the value of sea survival courses and getting the training so that you get hands-on with the equipment. Unless you've seen it in practice, it's really hard to visualise how this canister turns into a safe Wendy House haven for us all to kind of be rescued from. But, in this area, I've got bungees and lashings that I've thought about, but ultimately I've still got a knife right here. So worst case scenario, in the height of panic, we can still deploy everything as we need it.
Going back to those sea survival courses, it must suddenly make everything just so real, the situations, and just bring home why it's so important.
It is, and quite often we go through the procedure of, we'll use this equipment like this, but we don't think about, is the casualty in the water conscious or unconscious? Actually, the practicalities of recovering somebody from the water onto a high-sided vessel is really tricky. If they're unconscious, does it need another crew member to go in the water with them? Do we have a sling system so we can hoist them easily? Is our transom low enough to drag them? All these things need to be considered. Have I got some ability for them to get from the water back onto the boat if they're conscious and if they're unconscious? And we have to work all those scenarios through to have utter confidence that we're going to be able to do it when it matters.
And Alistair, you brought up that when doing sea survival, it's in controlled conditions. It's going to be often rough out there. And so having these procedures already nailed down, knowing exactly what you're going to do, so vital.
Absolutely critical. You do your RYA Sea Survival course or your World Sailing Sea Survival course. Most people remember the pool session, which in nearly all cases is done in a local swimming pool. It's warm. There's no waves, everybody's quite happy. Most of the time you can touch the bottom of the pool in some instances. So to learn what you need to learn on the course is a part of it, and it's actually only a small part of it, you then need to come back, and it goes back to what we were talking about right at the very beginning. Take what you've learnt and then try and interpret what you've learnt as to how it would work on a boat like this, because it would be very, very different on this boat to probably any other boat in the marina. Really important.
Dee, if the worst does happen, you and Shirley, you've practiced the situations. What do you do in a man overboard situation?
Ideally, we avoid it at all costs by using our 3-point tethers to stay attached to the boat. But these things do happen, so we've talked about it and practiced it, and our routine is very simple. Throw equipment out the back to reassure that person you've seen them, give them something to hold on to, and then you've got to get control of the boat. For us, being double-handed, it means dropping the head sail, be it a jib, jennica or a spinnaker. Get the boat under control, check the lines, we can turn the engine on, we're in a man overboard situation, we can head back. Or if conditions are really difficult, it's probably just as quick for us to sail with this boat. Do a nice manoeuvre. Conditions difficult when you're just a small head in the water, a boat coming towards you is quite scary. So deploying the sling is really nice, giving you that distance, but knowing that you'll get the attachment to that other person. Get them back on the boat. We've got a ladder to get back on the boat. We've got the sling to hoist them back over the side with a halyard. Or worst case scenario, it's quite low at the transom here. We can just grab them and drag them back on board.
Again, it comes back to that importance of practice and the entire crew understanding the safety routines, because getting somebody back on board a boat is not a simple task. Here you've got a nice low stern, but a lot of yachts don't have that, Dee.
No, and people forget that bit. They think about the actual manoeuvre of the boat. And actually for a double-handed crew, you need to have confidence that single-handedly you can get whatever sail at the front is down. And so we actually, although we train double-handed, we need to practice dropping the spinnaker on our own. And that's where you've got to have that reliance on the equipment that you're using and know that you're in control. But quite often every boat is different. So every boat needs to find what works for them. Is it a halyard over the side? Do they need to deploy somebody else into the water with them? Do they need to bring a ladder? Is there a system that they need for that boat? So if you're joining a new boat as a new crew member, make sure you understand what the system is so that everybody's on the same page when it comes to the routine. Because when it's scary and the adrenaline's flowing, you want everybody to be doing the right thing.
Alistair actually reiterating that point, making sure all of the crew are au fait with what goes on in an emergency situation. Absolutely vital.
Critical, absolutely critical. It doesn't really matter as well whether you're a racing crew or whether you're a family. Everybody needs to know the same amount of information, because it probably won't be the person who has all the knowledge might end up being the person who's in the water. And with a family, the worst case scenario is his dad has all the information and he's the one who falls in. And then you end up in a situation where you've got other people who don't have all that knowledge, trying to work out what to do. And learning about your safety equipment when you need to use your safety equipment is not the right time to learn about it.
So it is an area, everybody says it's their number one priority, but we've got to make sure that it is everybody's number one priority.
Absolutely. It's just so important that it stays at the top of the list. And it's something that's just talked about lots and lots and lots.
And Dee, you and Shirley, two of the most experienced sailors around, and yet you are making it your priority. How do you reinforce to weekend sailors that this is what they must do?
Well, I think it's a responsibility that we have as professional sailors to lead by example, do the right thing. And it's too easy for us to become au fait and relaxed and forget about our own safety. But actually people are looking to us. So we need to do it right and show that it works. Because a lot of people, it can be scary and it puts people off. But if we make it a normal subject, then it will be discussed more, thought about more. And it'll give confidence to families, to couples, to go and enjoy their boat and the time on the water with confidence. And that's what we want everybody to do on the water.
Well, Alistair, Dee, it's been fantastic to look through all the safety equipment that's available, how you've actually put it on the boat, and what you're going to do in an emergency situation. So many thanks indeed for your time.
Thank you.